read the whole book. These really are meant to be read all together as a body of work. The flow of the book is something that I'm really proud of, and it's such a fun read.
Hello, hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we need to have a chat, specifically about Gabbie Hanna and her poetry. The internet has some pretty brutal thoughts about Gabbie Hanna and her poetry. So I took it upon myself, a literary enthusiast, to actually review her poetry. How bad is it? And what she can do better to improve her writing, because I don't feel like criticizing someone without giving constructive feedback is nice or good or productive. So I have notes here on my computer, 5 pages worth of notes to be precise. So millennial poets are here, they're making their mark, and amongst them is Gabbie Hanna. In 2017, Gabriella Hanna released her first poetry book, Adultolescence. Yes, I bought it. $16.99. This year in 2020, in October, I think, she gave us Dandelion. There's some girls on the internet saying that Adultolescence is better than Dandelion, and I just want to say you're incorrect. The criticism this book got was very much warranted. This book is very flat, not only in content, but also in visuals. Like, the photos in them don't really have a lot of depth. It just looks very amateur. That's the word. This book looks amateur. The font, the sizing, the drawings, it's very amateur. Now, she has like specs where like her drawings are exponentially better than they had been in other parts of the books, but generally speaking, this book is not good. Then she gave us Dandelion. And people still hated Dandelion. People hated Dandelion before Dandelion even released. I went on Goodreads because if you want tea on books, you go to Goodreads. People were dragging her for poems that weren't even in this book. Before this book released, people were giving it 1 stars. And for that, I don't think that's cool. You at least had to give her a fighting chance because, to her credit, she did improve a lot in her book, Dandelion. In order to really understand the point that I'm going to try and drive home today about Gabbie's poetry, you do need to know a little bit about Rupi Kaur. She's Blueprint. That's really all you need to know, but I'm going to go a little bit into detail. Before Milk and Honey released, please tell me the last time you saw a poetry book being read by the masses, sold in Anthropology, and I'm pretty sure it was sold in Urban too. Excuse me. No, she revolutionized poetry. Rupi got her start on Tumblr and then moved to Instagram. And actually, Milk and Honey was written in 2014, hit the New York Times bestseller by 2016, and then after that, the rest is history, and we all just have created this genre of poetry. Actually, the genre already existed, but not necessarily to this extent. So she started on Tumblr, moved to Instagram, published, became a world sensation. Her books are printed in many, many languages. We all know and love her. So yeah, Rupi invented a new genre of poets called Insta poets. Let me get this right. This is cited by The Atlantic. I'll leave the article down below. 12 of the 20 best-selling poetry books in 2017 were written by Insta poets. Rupi Kaur started a revolution, and by 2017, the year after Milk and Honey hit New York Times bestsellers, 12 of the 20 best-selling poets were Insta poets. This just introduced a new category of poets that were making it and selling or outselling traditional poets. It's an industry, and there's a demand for the publishers now because these are making a bunch of money. Milk and Honey literally outsold the Odyssey, I think. What does every single famous person do? I'll wait. They write a book. When Gabbie releases a book and it's a poetry book, that honestly isn't that out of whack to me, because when she released the book when she released Adultolescence in 2017, like, that's the height of the Insta poet era. Of course she's gonna do that. I can say with my whole chest I think this was a cash grab. I don't feel that way as much about Dandelion, and I'll tell you why. The number one criticism that Gabbie gets is that her poems read like tweets. And when I was reading, before I even did research and like looked at other people's opinions about her writing, that is quite literally exactly what I thought. This book is better than Adultolescence. Worldly, not only in content, but the illustrations are more dimensional. Remember when I said Adultolescence was flat? Yeah, this book isn't that flat. But where I do give her credit is her illustrations. The illustrations in this book are actually really good, and I like how they interact with one another, which is something that she didn't do in Adultolescence and isn't present in other poetry books, or at least in the masses. There are just some that I think are like cute and clever, like this one, which is like light bulbs but like in balloon format, like stuff like this. There's another one like this one, like they're just more creative, and I feel like she put a little bit more work into them. Like obviously she probably got better because practice. Like this poem is also simultaneously an illustration, and it like exists on both sides, but it actually like the content of the poem matches the illustration. So for that, gold star. My main problem with Gabbie's poetry is that there is no lyrical to it. There is no interpretation. There is no nuance. Whatever she wants you to know, she just says flat out. Like literally there's no depth. Like there's no depth to 98% of the poems in this book. Now, I don't believe that poetry has to be overly complicated and lyrical, and it has to rhyme in order for it to be good. Gabbie has like talked about the widespread distaste for her poetry, and she's kind of just said like, oh, you have to read below the surface, you have to put some thought into it. Yes, these poems are good if you use your straight up imagination. Like, I think these books, I think like it goes for any poetry book. The book is as good as your imagination makes it, but the thing is, Gabbie's poetry doesn't really incite anything for you to like use your imagination. There is no like spark to sort of ignite your imagination because everything's just so plain and flat. Not everything, but most of the poems. Now, when I'm reading this book, I would say there are very few poems that I like in their entirety. So much as like I'll read and here and there I'll be like, oh, okay, that was a bar. Okay, Gabbie, bars, but like widespread, I don't think her poetry is that good. All right, I'm gonna give you a spoiler that I bet you didn't expect. This book is called Dandelion because Gabbie's favorite flower is a dandelion. Now, I called that before I even put my credit card into the chip reader. I knew that's why she called it dandelion. If she would have used like how dandelions grow as like a metaphor or like a skeleton for how the book was going to evolve, that would have made a whole lot of sense. She didn't. This book does not even represent the journey of a dandelion, like from when it grows to when it gets blown away. That would have been a genius way to format this book and like follow that arc. She didn't do that. She didn't do that. We got a poem telling us that dandelion was her favorite flower, and people gave her crap for it because it was technically a weed. The originality doesn't exist. Ugh. Anyways, I feel like all of these Insta poets, not all of them because I haven't read all of them, but I feel like the trap that some Insta poets are falling into is that they take this rupee mold and they try to just like substitute their own words into it, and it doesn't really translate that well because you're not Rupee. You see the vision that she has for herself and she's just not attaining it. The one thing that Rupee does that Gabbie doesn't is she has sections. Her book is quite literally broken up into chapters. Gabbie's doesn't have sections. And I'm not saying a poetry book has to have sections in order to be good, but what I'm saying is that this kind of the sections help tell the story. In Ruby's case, it aids in her storytelling. Gabbie now doesn't have that to rely on, which I think would actually enhance the reader's experience and like have it be a little bit more authentic and less cash grabby feeling. Ruby's poems read like a collection. Gabbie's poems read like 200 pages bound together. Like within these chapters, sections, whatever, there's like an evolution. Like she starts somewhere and she grows and she ends, and then she starts the next chapter of her journey and she starts somewhere and then she ends, and then at the end it all like aggregately comes together. You see like an evolution of her. I don't get that from Gabbie, which is kind of disappointing because I think she has like an interesting enough life. And to talk about the formatting of Gabbie's book is, like I said, it just feels like 200 pages bound together and sold for $18. I'm not mad, you are. It's boring to look at. I'm talking about the words on the page are boring to look at because everything is quite literally formatted the same way. There's no creativity. I'm glad I just flipped to it. The most creative layout she has for a poem is in her poem Bullet, and as you might guess, you see those? Those are bullet points. Oh, just kidding. Dogs. Like, she doesn't really play with the space on the page, and someone who actually does this really well is Amanda Lovelace, and I'm going to point her out because I think the way that she formats her poems is really unique. And Ruby doesn't do this either, really. So she uses like Roman numerals here. Those are not always centered. The stanzas don't always break in logical spots. She quite literally uses the layout of the page to help convey her story. I really hope her poems interact with the space on the page, I think, aids your understanding and appreciation. Also, strike-throughs. I think Gabbie's done this like once or twice, but like that's an effective tool. This is a hot take. I think Adultolescence is better in some ways than Swimming Lessons by Lily Reinhardt. It's boring because all the poems are the same. All of the poems are about love, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but even the ones that aren't about love read like they're about love. Like all of her poems have the same type of tone. However, I do like her illustrations here. I feel like to some extent, I guess they're not all that similar, but I do feel like, shut up. Whenever a new poet comes out and they add illustrations, they kind of follow this like minimalistic, continuous line type of bit. And I appreciate that Gabbie didn't take that route with her illustrations. If we're gonna rank millennial poets, at least the ones that I've read, I'm 1, 2, 3, 4. I can't sit here and lie. If I said I did not laugh reading this book, that would be a straight up lie. But, bruh, I'm gonna tell you a poem I laughed at. It's called Plagiarism. You can't take credit for my sadness. I earned this on my own. Like, what? I bought this book from Target, and that's significant because Gabbie released 3 different versions of this book. That was an overkill. Anyways, at the end of this book, I think they're called like stories I have to be drunk to tell. This is her bread and butter. The prose part, the story times, that's her bread and butter. Is it great? No, but it's significantly better than her poems. They had a message, there were characters, there was development. Look, if Gabbie released a book of just like short stories, I think I would genuinely enjoy that. The short stories are just so much better. Like, I want to see her pursue short stories. And side tangent, Gabbie started a new YouTube channel where it's really just her like smoking weed in her bathtub, and she has like all these deep conversations with people. that's who I want to hear from. That's the development that she's going through right now. I'm fine with that, and I would want to support that. That's what I'm interested in. I want depth, and I know she has it because she gives it on the internet. Why can't we put it in a book? The brain power you must invest to read this book is minimal, negligible. Part of the reason I don't like the way that Gabbie promotes her books is that she kind of promotes them as these like literal poetic masterpieces. She has a lot of room for growth. I would love for her to get like a mentor. Like, just stick to short stories.
Oh, I know. If I could just like be a New York Times bestseller. If I was just looking for a quick buck on that, I would have hired a ghostwriter to write a memoir.
You should have. If you were going to go the poetry route, you should have just hired the ghostwriter. It's not clear what bucket you're supposed to be putting Gabbie in. Sometimes Gabbie goes on tangents and she's like, promoting that you need a whole lot of intellectual brain power to read her poems. And then other times she flips the script and is like, this is just for fun. This makes me happy. I'm doing this, where she kind of gives off the vibe that like she doesn't care what you think about her poems. She doesn't care what category you put her in. She's just grateful to be here, that kind of vibe. And then obviously sometimes she's like, New York Times bestseller, intellectual, but like it's not. Are the poems good? No, not really. Did I enjoy the book? Yeah, low key. Like, it was entertaining because it isn't like anything else on the market, and you can take that how you will. But alright, that is my 2 cents on Gabbie Hanna's poetry and where she fits in this industry. I will have links to all of the books I mentioned down below. I will also link the Atlantic article that I talked about earlier. And yeah, follow me on my socials. Alright, bye!